All right, well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about the new HOBO TidbiT MX2205 external temperature logger. My name is Paul Gannett. I'm Principal HOBO Product Manager here, and I'm very happy to have you with us today. Just some quick logistics. The webinar is going to run for about 45 minutes, and that includes about 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. Feel free to submit questions during the webinar, and some of them I may address during the webinar. Others I'll save for the question and answer time. Also, I want to thank those who sent questions in advance. Some of those questions I've actually integrated into the webinar, so hopefully I'll address them as we go, and a couple of those I think I'll save for the question and answers time. If you do have questions, how you send them to us is you enter them into the questions section in the control panel. So take a look at that and see where that is. And the webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a link to the recording in a follow-up email. I think most of you know who we are. Onset, we make the HOBO data loggers. We're located here on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and our whole focus is on data loggers and providing accurate data. We've got a global network of distributors, so I think many of you are coming in from international locations as well. And we take a lot of pride in the quality with which we make our data loggers. That's what that ISO standard is. It just helps to ensure the quality of the product. As I said, my name is Paul Gannett. I've been with Onset now for some 26 years, over 26 years, and I've had the pleasure of working with our users in our engineering department to develop our line of HOBO data loggers for environmental applications. Currently, I'm focusing on our standalone loggers for, again, for environmental applications. And I get a lot of feedback through providing training and support for our sales team and technical support teams, as well as folks like you, our users. So here's our rough agenda for today. I'm going to start out with a couple of polls just to find out a little bit about you and your applications. Then I'll go into an overview of our MX2200 line of products just to kind of put things in context. And then I'll get into some of the details of the MX TidbiT external temperature logger, the new one. Talk about some applications and question and answers for any questions that I didn't address during the webinar. And as you may remember, we offered a raffle to one lucky winner who's attending the webinar. So at the end of the webinar, I will announce who our winner is. So good luck to all of you. So first question, the first poll question is what kind of environment are you monitoring? Is it water or soil? And is it fresh water or salt water? We'll turn on the poll, give you a chance to answer that. And if you've got these 5 categories, if your application doesn't fit into any one of those, just type it into the questions box on your control panel. So I'll give you some time to do that. So I can see the data coming in pretty strongly. Yeah, you got good. If you've got multiple environments, you can enter in all your different environments. So, all right, looks like it's kind of stabilizing here. So we'll share the results. And yeah, majority streams, rivers, lakes, and wetlands. No surprise there. This, especially given the nature of this logger, this is a good one. The new logger is good for those applications. And quite a few of you are also doing soil monitoring, and then a few are doing coastal saltwater applications as well. So good. This gives me a good sense. No, nobody's doing compost, although I noticed in the questions I did get somebody who was asking about compost, but maybe they're not logged in quite yet. So we'll stop that poll and start the next one. And that is, how long do you typically need to monitor temperature at a site? I've kind of broken this down into somewhat arbitrary buckets just to give me a sense. Relatively short deployments of only up to 6 months. then I know a lot of people will just deploy them seasonally for multiple years. So we have choices for that. Then, longer deployment, 6 months to a year, or just continuously. So hopefully one of those fits your application. So I'll give you half a minute to enter yours. Enter the closest in this case. Although I guess, yeah, you can enter multiple. That's fine too. Get a little more interesting or even distribution this time, as I'm seeing the stats come in. All right. I think that's good. So we'll share those results. Pretty even between 6-month deployments for multiple years or continuous. Okay, that kind of makes sense. That's been my sense, that most of our users are using our loggers for extended monitoring. So that makes sense. All right, so good. It just gives me a sense of where you're coming from. So thanks for allowing me to take your time for that. Let's go on and actually get into the meat of the presentation. So first, I wanted to kind of give you the overview of the MX2200 line. The first 4 models, starting at the left, are the ones we've been selling. You can see that these are all waterproof loggers designed for monitoring water temperatures primarily, or soil temperatures. Both of those are important applications for these. They've all got internal sensors versus our new one that we're introducing today, which has the external temperature sensor. And you can see we offer a range of prices. And the main factors that differentiate these are the accuracy. The pendant models are 0.5 degrees C accuracy, while the tidbit models are 0.2 degrees C accuracy. We've got an immersion detect feature on the tidbit models, except for the new one that I'm introducing today. The battery life, well, it ranges between 1 and 5 years, depending upon the model and the operating mode. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. The depth rating kind of gives you a general indication of the durability of the logger. The TidbiT MX2205 being our highest depth rating and the most durable, because it's encased in epoxy, makes it really robust. Our new one's encased in epoxy, but just with a temperature sensor added, it doesn't have quite the depth rating, but it's still very robust. So let me talk first about some of the common features. All of these loggers are waterproof, designed for long-term immersion in water, soils, other liquids, as long as they're not too harsh chemicals. It also means they're weatherproof. We have a lot of people using these outdoors as well for monitoring outdoor temperatures and conditions like the light levels outside. The battery life is 1 to 5 years, depending upon the model, as we saw in that previous chart, in the Bluetooth mode. So if the Bluetooth is always on, it gets a somewhat shorter battery life of 1 to 3 years, depending upon the model. But then you also have an option for turning off the Bluetooth when you're just logging and you don't need to access the data or the logger. And that can basically increase your battery life by another year or 2. So, and then when you want to connect to the logger, you press a button on the logger to activate the Bluetooth communications, and then that allows you to communicate at that time. So you got the choice there. All of them feature flexible mounting boots that have 2 mounting tabs for added security. The boot is kind of a rubberized boot, which provides additional protection, and it can be removed if you're really trying to squeeze the logger into a tight space. All of them have a capacity for 96,000 measurements, which can, at a 15-minute rate, can last you over a year for your deployments. And some models have this water immersion detection. You can see on the yellow tidbit there, it's got a couple screw heads on it. Those are what are used to detect if it's in water or not. And that's useful in applications where the water presence is intermittent, such as a tidal application, where you want to know whether the logger's measuring water temperature or air temperature. Just as important. A lot of times you can tell that from the data, but it's nice to have events logged to tell you very specifically in the data set where that water to air transition happened. They also have alarm indications, and it tells you if their alarm condition occurred during the deployment. So let's talk about the new MX external temp version. It's got some new features. One is it's got 2 temperature channels, one external temperature channel on a 2-meter cable, and that 2-meter cable is the only length we sell that in. I know I got one question on that in advance. It's not an interchangeable cable because it's integrated right into the logger. And 2 meters should be enough for most applications, we hope, or we can obviously introduce new models if demand permits or dictates. It also has an internal temperature sensor. So you can use that for measuring, ambient air temperature, for example. The external temperature sensor has a faster temperature response, as you'd expect, because it's a much smaller sensor. It can respond to water temperature changes in 20 seconds to 90% of the step change versus 4 minutes for the internal sensors. Now, in a lot of cases, that 4 minutes response time is fine, for most natural waters, but if you're like at a power plant where you can get a sudden discharge of water, you might want to have a faster response time. The battery life for this is 3 years with Bluetooth always on. That's the most convenient way to use it so that you can always walk up to it and offload the data. But you also have the option of turning off the Bluetooth and you get a 5-year battery life in that case. And you just have to, when you go out to offload the data, you press the button. The button's that little thing that looks like a nose on the front of the logger that says HOBO. And that will turn on the Bluetooth communications. This logger is encased in epoxy. So that means that the battery is not replaceable. It's robust by having it this way, but the battery cannot be replaced. A couple notes: the logger does not have a water immersion detect feature, as some of the other tidbits do. And we do not recommend deploying the external sensor in salt water at this time. Basically, it's stainless steel and there's some etching on it, which could rust if it's deployed in salt water for an extended time. Certainly for short times, it's fine. We may make a design change to qualify it for saltwater use in the future, but stay tuned for that if that's your need. I saw a few of you are deploying in saltwater, so yeah, stay tuned for that. Other features of the new loggers, we have a gateway, and that gateway is designed for indoor use. It connects to the internet via Wi-Fi or Ethernet, and this gateway can push data up to our HOBO cloud software service, where you can access your data at any time, which is a pretty powerful feature. You can also configure your own dashboard views, so you can see the data displayed in a way that provides the information you're most interested in. You can get alarm notifications through the internet, call your cell phone, or send a text message. So this is great for applications where you're deploying these loggers in like a lab, where you've got maybe a bunch of tanks, simulating different environmental conditions, and you just want to keep tabs on them, and you want to get an alarm notification if any of your tanks get out of kind of the safe limits for whatever, shellfish or whatever you're trying to grow in those tanks. So the MX gateway is a nice option, and the logger communicates to that gateway through the integrated Bluetooth. So actually, speaking of the Bluetooth, I just have a question here. I think I'll address it now. Can the Bluetooth be turned on remotely, or do you have to be physically there to turn it back on? And yeah, the Bluetooth, in order to activate the Bluetooth, if you've turned it off during logging, you need to push the button on the front of the logger to turn that Bluetooth communications back on. So you do need to be out there, but you can have somebody else push the button on. If you've got an associate who happens to be on site, you can tell them to, hey, go out and push the button and offload the data. You can even have them download a copy of HOBO Connect, our free software, and offload the data for you and email that to you. We'll talk more about that later on. We do have a NIST option for this. It's an extra option you can pay for to get it certified in a NIST controlled lab environment. Be happy to do that for the external temperature probe. And as I mentioned, these are encased in epoxy, which means you can't change the battery, but it makes them really robust. And you can also take the boot off, and you can see it gets a little, smaller when you do that. In some cases, like some people like to mount these on, reptiles or something like that to see what temperatures they're experiencing. You can make it smaller there. Some of the key specs: the external temperature sensor has a range from -40 to 100 degrees C, right up to boiling. And in water, we limit that to 50 degrees C of sustained temperatures. Of course, it can, withstand, intermittent temperatures up to 100 C. The logger itself is rated for -20 to 70 degrees C, and up to 50 degrees C in water, or 30 degrees C if it's a sustained temperature. So you just, some limitations of the materials in the batteries. The accuracy in the range of 0 to 70 C is that 0.2 degrees C that I mentioned before. For those of you that are watching remotely in other countries, we comply with all the relevant standards, and I guess we comply with the FCC standards here in the US as well. So pretty much most places around the world, you can use these, and it complies with the Bluetooth standards. So I'm just going to give you a little example of how these are deployed. So for this sample, I have a little fountain in my backyard, and there's the logger, and I have the external temperature probe going down into there's a big reservoir of water below the fountain where the water sits. So that's mostly below ground level. So I wanted to see what the temperature variations were within that. And so I'm going to kind of take you through the software. So this is just kind of a simulated use, but I'm going to take you through all the screens that you would use to configure the logger before it's deployed. And so the first screen, when you're out there, you run our HOBO Connect app, and it will show all the MX Bluetooth loggers that are within its range. So I've got a couple other loggers nearby as well, so it shows them. But the fountain is the logger that I want to configure. So what I do is I tap on that top bar, and it will connect me to that logger via Bluetooth, and it brings up this screen here. And this is kind of the main screen for the logger. You can see it's actually showing the current temperatures. It's showing two temperatures. The first temperature is for the external sensor, and the second temperature is for the internal sensor inside the logger. So you can see they're pretty close, but there is variations, of course. You can see that the logger is logging in this case. You can see the serial number to make sure you're talking to the right logger. To configure it, you'd go to the screen that says configure there. I also want, before going to the configuration screen though, I do want to point out there's the option to view live data just below that. That's kind of handy, and actually one of the questions that came in advance was somebody wanted to know if they could see live data, and yes, you can when you're out there with the logger. So just a nice way to confirm what's going on with your logger. So now I'm going to tap on that screen that says, part of the screen that says configure and start. And that brings me into the configuration screen for the logger. And you can see, I've entered in the name fountain. You could also enter in a group. This helps in organizing your loggers and data files. Some of the functions are based on the group that it's part of. Then you scroll down a little further on the screen, you can set up the logger settings. In this case, I chose a 15-minute logging interval, and it will tell me right there that means there's enough memory for this logger to log for 1.4 years. So, leave it out there for quite a while before the memory fills up. And start logging mode is on next interval. That's usually what I use, so that it's on even 15-minute intervals. You could also start immediately if you want, or set it up for a delayed start at some future time. If you want to start at midnight tonight, for example. Stop logging when the memory fills. You can also set a time for it to stop logging if you want to have a very defined time period of data. You can do that. There's a couple different logging modes, fixed logging mode versus burst. So you've got some choices there. And as I mentioned, you can choose to have the Bluetooth on continuously, which I've set it here. So that's the most convenient. So you can talk to the logger at any time. But you can also set it to Bluetooth off so that you only turn on Bluetooth when you're at the logger. When I've got it all, well, let me show you a couple other options. There's also the ability to turn channels on or off. If you only want to log the external data, you could do that by turning off the internal temperature sensor. And you can also turn on alarms on each channel. When you've got it all configured the way you want it, you come down to the start button there that's in the lower right. Click on that or tap on that, and that'll download that configuration to the logger, and you can deploy it. So deploy it in my little fountain there. Now I've left it out there for a couple of days, and now I want to download the data and view the data. So here's what I go through then. Again, I go through the same starting screen to connect to the logger. So I connect to my fountain logger. And on this screen, now I look for the button that says download data. So I tap on that, and that downloads the data, and that brings it. I skipped over. It shows you a screen that confirms that you downloaded the data. Then after you've downloaded the data, you hit back, and that brings you back to this main screen. And from this main screen, there's a data icon down at the bottom. You want to click on that or tap on that. And that'll bring up all the data files that you have offloaded, and the most recent ones first, or at the top. So I'm going to offload my fountain data file. And that produces, when I look at that, it produces this graph. You can see the external temperature sensor that was down in the water is the red line. So the water acts as kind of a low pass filter, so it changes temperature much more slowly. The green line is the logger itself. And you can see that it actually, because it's in the air, its temperature is changing much more quickly. It's also in the sun, so some of those spikes, I'm sure, are due to solar radiation heating. So just interesting to see how the two channels compare. Now, if I want to export that or share it to somebody else, I click on those three buttons, and it brings up this little bar at the top. Then I can tap on that icon with a square box and the arrow. I can select what format I want to export it in. So it could be like an Excel file format, for example. And then you can choose how you want to share it. For the apps that you have installed on your computer, messaging apps, email, WhatsApp, or it could be a Google Drive. A lot of you I know like to keep your data consolidated in a Google Drive. And so that's, I've kind of taken you through the process of configuring the logger, offloading the data. There's one other option I thought that would be useful for you to know about, which is you can set it up for automatic upload to HOBO. Now, HOBO is a web hosting service that we provide. You can set up your own account, and you can use this to get centralized access to all your data. So this actually ties into a question that just came through about cell service. HOBO Connect doesn't require cell service except for the case where you want to upload your data to HOBO Link. HOBO Connect will offload the data, it'll store it locally on your mobile device, which, by the way, I didn't mention, HOBO Connect can run on an iPhone, Android device, or a Windows device. So any of those are supported at this time. So we'll always store it locally on your device that you use to offload the data. But the next time it's within any sort of internet connectivity. It could be cellular, it could be Wi-Fi. It will, if you've set this option up, it will automatically upload that data to HOBOLINK. And then and you can see how I've set it up here. I've set up a HOBOLINK account. I've created it. My account's called Paul G. I had to enter in my credentials, my password, in other words, and I can choose to upload that data only via Wi-Fi or cellular as well. So yeah, other features of that centralized upload to HOBOLINK. Once you have the data there, you can easily select any of your data that's there based on the devices, the measurements, and the time frame. So it makes a nice centralized database for you to store your data. So that's a nice feature to keep in mind. Oh, and another question that just came through here is when the file is uploaded to HOBOLINK, does the memory automatically clear? And the answer to that is no, it doesn't automatically clear, but we do have a feature within HOBO Connect that allows you to delete multiple files at once. So you just click, I think it's up to 20 files there. If, once you're sure you've offloaded the data for those data files, you can select those and delete them kind of all at once, just to make it a little more convenient. So let me just talk a little bit about applications and common users. So you probably know what your applications are. But it's interesting. Maybe this will trigger some other thoughts of how you could use these. Certainly waters and wetlands. That was when I did my little survey earlier, that's where the bulk of you were. Could be on a buoy as well. Could be aquatic environments with fast temperature changes. And it could be tanks in a lab. I think a few of you mentioned you were monitoring tanks. And then many of you were also doing monitoring temperatures in soils and fields, which is one of the features of this logger is if it's a field that can get flooded, it's waterproof, so the flooding of the field won't bother it. In this case, I'm showing a picture of a logger deployed in a cranberry bog, and those do get flooded intentionally. They'll flood them for harvest, they'll flood them for frost protection, and sometimes for irrigation as well if it's been particularly dry. So it's nice to have a logger that's waterproof for those kind of applications. You can also use them in compost, but you have to be careful to protect the cable and the sensor end in some sort of conduit to keep it from being deteriorated, damaged by whatever chemicals are in that compost. There's some nasty stuff there that's breaking down the matter into soil. So you just got to be careful of that. If you are mounting it in water, you can mount it on a stake. That's a pretty common way that they'll be deployed, or a post, such as a T-post. But you'll also want to make sure you secure the cable to that post so it's not dangling and catching debris, and you don't want it to catch on anything. You also want to be careful to not interfere with any boat traffic that might be in the waterway, so just be sensitive to that. You can run it down along the bank and just secure the cable to the side of the bank so that it's, again, not catching on any debris, or it could be on a bridge support. You can use conduit to protect it there as well. And in soil, in some cases, if it's an active facility, you may want to make sure that people know that that logger is there, in which case you want to put on a stake so it's visible. But it's also okay to lay it down, on the ground, because it's waterproof. If it gets flooded in a rain event, that's not going to hurt it. One thing you want to keep in mind is that insects and rodents do like to chew on plastic cables, so you might want to protect the cable and conduit if insects or rodents are an issue in your deployment area. And a compost, as I mentioned, you got to protect that cable to make sure it doesn't get damaged by the chemical processes in that. Air temperature, you can use the logger or the temperature sensor to measure air temperatures. But if it's in a place that's exposed to sunlight, you will want to protect it in a solar radiation shield, and we sell radiation shields where either the logger or the sensor can be mounted. Just coming back to this chart, which you saw before, which is just kind of shows you the different trade-offs. And again, you can choose the best logger for your application based on price, the measurements that you need. If you want light, there's just the Pendant MX temp light logger that measures light. We also have stations that will measure light, but that's kind of a different ball game. And temperature accuracy is another differentiating factor. You can see the different temperatures. If you want that immersion detection feature, you want to be looking at either the 2203 or the 2204 loggers. And those are also, all the TidbiT loggers have the longest battery life, the 3 to 5 year battery life, depending upon whether Bluetooth is always on or it's off. So again, comparing the new MX2205 versus the other 2200 series loggers, the 2205 is great for shallow waters where you can mount the logger above the water, enabling direct data readout without having to pull out the logger. That's can be really handy. And even my little deployment out here in the fountain, I was able to read out the water temperatures very conveniently, just standing next to the fountain without having to pull up the logger to get the data. And that can be especially useful if you're monitoring soil temperatures as well. One of the questions I got in advance is from somebody who deploys the loggers. I think it said 50 centimeter depth, so half a meter, so pretty deep. For that case, yeah, you'd want to bury the external temperature sensor down at that depth and keep the logger at the surface so you can read out the logger conveniently without having to dig it up. The other advantage, main advantage of the 2205 is the faster temperature response time, 20 seconds versus 4 minutes. It is a little bit more expensive, so but $10, not a big deal. And the battery is not user replaceable, like it is user replaceable on these other models I listed here. If you're in a saltwater application, I'd recommend the 2203 or the 2204. Those are rated for saltwater deployments. And the 2205 is the new external temperature model, is not currently rated for saltwater use, but again, maybe in the future. I also want to compare the new MX2205 to a couple other loggers that have external temperature sensors. We have the MX2300 series, which are weatherproof loggers, and two of those models have external temperature sensors. The 2304 has one external temperature sensor, and the 2303 has two external temperature sensors. You can see how those compare price-wise there. And the main difference, in this case, is the 2205 would be your choice if you're going to be in a location that could get flooded. Whereas if it's, there's no risk of it flooding, then the 2204, the 2300 series loggers would be fine. So here's just kind of another way of looking at that. The 2205 is for locations that might flood because it's waterproof. It's also a little bit smaller. It's a little bit lower cost if you need the two temperatures, but you can also get two temperatures with the model 2304. But that one, in that case, is a little more expensive. The other advantage of the 2300s is they do have replaceable batteries. And of course, we still offer our ever popular optic USB, HOBO optic USB loggers, the WaterTemp Pro, the TidbiT V2, and our Pendant UAs. So we're trying to encourage new users to migrate to and start off with our MX series loggers due to the advantage that Bluetooth offload and configuration offers. But we also realize that a lot of you really love the optic USB loggers, proven reliability. You've got the base station and shuttles already for configuring them and offloading the data. So they're a great solution, which we're going to continue to support. So I've gone through all my prepared material. So now I have some time to answer some of the questions you've sent in. And so let's see, let me kind of scroll through them. I'm going to start at the top. Some of these questions I may have answered, so it's going to just stay with me as I look through the questions and see which ones I haven't answered yet. Let's see. Sorry, most of these I have covered, so that's good. I got some, there's a couple of specific questions in here. I'm gonna, I think we'll just follow up on them. So, because they're very, we really need to talk through them to give you a good answer. There's a question on the gateway, whether it uses 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. And to be honest, I'm not sure which Wi-Fi standard it follows. I think it's a 2.4, but I'm not sure, to be honest. So that's a question I'm not going to be on to now. Let's see. Oh, okay. Lisa, you had the question on the memory, if it clears, and you provided a little more detail. When you offload the data, it doesn't necessarily stop the logger. You have the choice. You can offload the data, and it just offloads the data up to the point where you offloaded it. But if you continue to log, it'll offload the new data as part of the same data file. So that way, after a year, you can get that same, that one data file with all your data in one place. So that's pretty handy. But if you want to stop it and give it a fresh start, you can do that with a logger as well. One of the options within HOBO Connect is to stop the logger and restart it. So that clears out your memory, so you have a whole nother data set to or full capacity to capture your data. Let's see. Oh, and one other thing I should mention, I think this is kind of assumed with most data loggers today, is if the battery dies during the deployment, the data is retained. You don't have to worry about losing any data that's been logged. Of course, you might lose the data after the battery dies, but the data is protected in non-volatile memory, and you'll be able to offload it when you put a new battery into your logger. Let's see. Yeah. Ooh, it's good input. In the future, can you consider building a model with wireless charging? Very waterproof and user rechargeable. I like your love getting inputs like this. And another question here is, does Onset have plans to make other loggers with Bluetooth? And yeah, I do want to say that that's kind of the direction we're moving. That most of our new loggers that we're working on will all have Bluetooth communications. It's just there's many advantages of that, and so we're really, for future development, that's really the platform we're focusing on. So that's another reason that we're recommending migrating to the MX loggers if you can, because that just positions you well for the future. So I think I've gone through most of the questions, either during the presentation or have addressed them now. So thanks for sending them in. If you got any other quick question, let me know. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go to the next slide. And I just wanted to kind of remind you that we have a great website that has all the product specifications and pricing and pretty much everything you could want to know about the loggers, the user manuals, everything's there, application stories, other webinars that you can access. So I encourage you to use onsetcomp.com as a resource for gathering all this information. You can also give us a call at any time. And next thing I wanted to say is we talked about the raffle. We do have a winner, and our winner is Keith West. So congratulations, Keith. We'll get you out one of our new loggers. You'll be one of the first to have them. We'll contact you to make arrangements for that. So with that, I just want to say thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. I really appreciate you taking the time to take a look at these loggers. We're always here to help you with any questions, so feel free to give us a call or check us out on the website. And as you're leaving, we do have a couple questions for you to share your feedback. So we love getting your feedback. Hope to keep making our webinars better. And you can let us know if you'd like us to follow up with more specific conversations about your application. So, all right, thanks again.